Okay, picking back up with Unit 1.2, continuing on, left off yesterday with the French invasions of Italy and the Italy becoming a battleground, the series of power struggles between Spain and France. We're going to pick back up today with an individual whose work was influenced by the chaos of these foreign invasions, and that is Machiavelli. In his work, The Prince, published in 1513, it is the quintessential political treatise of the 16th century. He had the opportunity to observe the political leadership of Caesar Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, who had ambitions of uniting Italy under his control. Machiavelli was an admirer of the Roman rulers and citizens and very much wanted to see the political unity and independence of Italy being resurrected. So he is going to compile a work that states that politically the ends justify the means, or really whatever it would take a leader to do to reunite Italy or to do the best for his people. It doesn't matter what he did to get there. The ends will justify the means. He also states that for rulers it was better to be feared than to be loved. He promotes this new term virtue, which we'll take another look at again as we move further into humanism. But the act of heroically and decisively acting for the good of one's country, along those lines of still, even if it wasn't something people may be consider a good thing you had to do, as long as you accomplish your end, the means are justified. He stated that for rulers it was better to be feared than loved. This is probably one of the most common things that you will hear about Machiavelli and the Prince, which we'll have a chance to read and pick apart in class. He also believed that rulers had to be practical and cunning, in addition to being aggressive and ruthless, so a combination of both. He believed that at times rulers should behave like a lion, aggressive and powerful on one side, and at other times like a fox, cunning and practical. The Prince is going to continue to influence European rulers for centuries. And its purpose was at this time to recommend the temporary use of fraud and brutality to achieve Italian unity. His real hope was that a ruler from the Medici family will step up and reunite Italy, but as I foreshadowed for you, sorry, spoiler alert, yesterday, this will not come true, although the Prince will continue to influence European rulers for centuries. The sack of Rome will occur in 1527 by the armies of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who was also the King of Spain. So again, we have Spain being victorious over France and their struggles for dominance in Italy. Another thing to note about 1527, or the sack of Rome, is that it will be the demise, or the symbolize the end of the Renaissance in Italy. Although we're going to continue to talk about the Renaissance in Italy and its impact, this will symbolize the end of the Renaissance in Italy. Still have the Renaissance to follow into Northern Europe and into England, but the sacking of Rome, 1527, an important date to remember. So next we're going to actually talk about humanism. We're going to go over some of the characteristics of humanism first, and then we'll get into some of our humanists and the works that we're going to be looking at in this class. So humanism is characterized by a revival of antiquity, or a revival of Greece and Rome in philosophy, literature, and art. Humanism is going to seek to reconcile pagan writings with Christian thought. It's a strong belief in individualism and the great potential of human beings. This is one you'll definitely find in contrasting the Middle Ages with the Renaissance, because in the Middle Ages, humans were seen as small, wicked, and inconsequential, just like little ants running around in an ant farm. and focused solely on earning salvation. So the Middle Ages was more about the life after this life rather than the life you were living, where humanism is going to focus on individualism and potential human beings have to change the world around them. This harkens us back to that term virtue that we just talked about with Machiavelli, or the quality of being a man. The idea of excelling in all of one's pursuits, of your human potential to do that. And also the belief that the key to a good life was using your reason and nature. Humanism is first going to focus on studying ancient language. Initially, Latin of ancient Rome will be the main focus, but after the Byzantine Empire falls in 1453, Greek will come to be studied rigorously as well. And by 1500, virtually all of the significant ancient Roman and Greek texts that have been rediscovered will be translated and printed. So this is a huge deal in the humanist movement and in scholasticism and in things as we move on with the Renaissance. Another characteristic of humanism, though, is the rejection of Aristotle views and medieval scholasticism in favor of Roman authors such as Cicero, Livy, Virgil, and Quintilian. The humanism is going to have more of a focus on Greek writings, especially those of Plato. Even the early Christian authors are going to be a focus, and especially the writers of the New Testament. However, the early Christian writers' focus in humanism will occur predominantly in Northern Europe and become the cornerstone of the Northern Renaissance. So we'll see more of that as we move there. But it's definitely a turn towards Platoism and Neoplatonists, the flattering view of human reason as part of the ideal eternal world, versus this negative, perishable view. So we'll definitely see that shift here. Humanism is believed in liberal arts and educational programs that include grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, politics, moral philosophy, and really emphasizes civic humanism, which we talked about in yesterday's lecture for just a second, or the idea that one's education should prepare leaders who should be active in civic affairs, that you should be ready, prepared, and educated to be a leader. And some of our most important humanists are also going to be some of our most important political leaders in the Renaissance, and we'll get a chance to talk about them in more detail. Often humanism will be more secular and lay-dominated, meaning non-religious. However, most humanists at this time period are going to remain very deeply Christian, both in Italy and in Northern Europe. And we're going to talk about some of those humanist authors and some examples of that here shortly. So, Petrarch, that we talked about yesterday, or the father of humanism, he is going to be one of our focuses here at the beginning, but we will not have a chance to read a piece from him because his writing was a little bit earlier. But 1304 to 1374, the father of humanism, and considered the first modern writer. In his writings, literature is no longer subordinate to religion. So literature isn't just for the example of religion. Literature is going to become its own entity. It's going to become its own significant claim. He's also going to claim that the Middle Ages, or the period between the fall of the Roman Empire and the emergence of the Renaissance, were the Dark Ages. So here we have the coining of the term Dark Ages. He contrasts the the bleakness of the time between the greats of Greek and Rome, and this bleakness in between, and then the resurrection here in the Renaissance to be the Dark Ages, something that is still some debated in the historical world. He was perhaps the first to use critical textual analysis to ancient texts, to really break apart text, pick them apart, be able to analyze, source them. He was especially influenced by Cicero, and wrote his most famous poetry in the Italian vernacular. So here's a use again of that national language or common language of Italian, as did Dante earlier in his Divine Comedy. So we have another great Italian nationalist writer. Boccaccio is our next individual that we're going to take a look at. He compiled an encyclopedia of Greek and Roman mythology, so again, harkening back to the classical Rome and Greece. The Decameron, however, is his most famous work, and it consisted of 100 earthly tales that comprise a social commentary of 14th century Italy. So really very humanistic in the fact that it's looking at society and at people and at the social period here. He aimed to impact wisdom of human nature and human character and behavior, especially sexual and economic misbehavior, kind of his favorite things to zone in on. The next is Bruni that we're going to take a look at. He is actually the first one to use the term humanism, so we have a lot of coining of terms in this unit. He is among the most important of the civic humanists. And he served as a chancellor in Florence. He wrote a history of Florence, perhaps the first modern history, and wrote a narrative using primary source documents in the division of historical periods. Next, sorry about that, I got ahead of myself, is Valla, and he is the foremost expert on the Latin language and published the work Elegances of the Latin Language. He is going to expose the donation of Constantine as an 8th century fraud using textual criticism, so using that analysis of text again, questioning the things around you. The church had used this document to claim that it was granted territories by the 4th century Roman Emperor Constantine. And Valla's going to point out the errors in the Latin Vulgate as well, the authorized version of the Bible for the Catholic Church. So he's really kind of hearkening in some challenges against the church. And his work will give ammunition to those critics of the church, although he remains a devoted Catholic and even served as a secretary under Pope Nicholas V. Next is Ficino, 1433 to 1499, and he's one of the most influential humanist philosophers of the 15th century. He founded the Platonic Academy at the behest of Cosimo de' Medici in the 1460s, so the Medici family there again popping its head in. And it served to spread the works and philosophy of Plato throughout much of Europe. He will also translate Plato's work into Latin, giving modern Europeans access to these works for the very first time. So very important, Plato and humanism. Mirandola was a member of that Platonic Academy, and his most famous work is the Oration on the Dignity of Man. It's perhaps the most famous Renaissance work on the nature of humankind. Humans were created by God and therefore given tremendous potential for greatness and even union with God if they desired it. However, humans could, through neglect, also choose a negative course. Thus, humans had free will to be great or to fail. So he really opens that door between human potential and religion here, and we'll take a look at this piece. Machiavelli, back to Machiavelli, which we started with, who gave us The Prince, was his views were decidedly secular, and his emphasis on individualism reflected humanist philosophy. He really focused on the non-religious themes, on rulers, and on individualism and having to do things as an individual for the best of the greater good, but for yourself. And he also studied classical history thoroughly in order to get a more realistic portrait of politics. So he really looks back at the Romans and the Greeks, admiring them, and tries to get a portrait of politics from them. Castiglione, or in the Book of the Courtier, we're going to be taking a look at as well. Perhaps the most important work on Renaissance education, specified qualities necessary to be a true gentleman, including physical and intellectual abilities, and leading an active life. It rejected crude contemporary social habits, such as spitting on the floor, eating without utensils, wiping one's nose with their sleeve, things like that. And on the flip side of that, he'll describe the ideal of a Renaissance man who was well versed in the Greek and Roman classics,